latest to the recent, outside the very hot discussion related to DCEP that has actually happened in China, but also the labor association that's recently changed the kind of like the proposal to the government related to structures. So we have two guests today, Mr. Chao Yin and Calvin from Prime Trust. So maybe you two you guys can actually give us a really quick 1 minute discussion or introduction about yourself.
Yeah, maybe from me. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Chao Yin, the Managing Director of Digital Renaissance Foundation. And the foundation is registered in Estonia, and we provide this kind of compliance services to cryptocurrency companies. And also we are co-part of the so-called Digital Nation Plan of the Estonian government, and we provide this kind of advisory services to those other partners within the ecosystem in Estonia. And also we are running a small virtual incubation, somehow like places both in Finland and also in China, in Shanghai. We are incubating several small but very growing fast DeFi companies in Finland as well as in Shanghai. Okay.
And Kevin?
My name is Kevin Latinity. I serve as the CTO and Chief Product Officer at Prime Trust. Prime Trust's mission really is to provide a global open banking API. And we do a lot of that in what we call the digital asset space, which is kind of the crypto space. So we serve as payment rails and as banking to a lot of different exchanges, stable coins, a lot of the kind of blockchain projects that are out there.
Nice. Thank you. Welcome. So my name is Lennox. In case you know, I've been working for OKEx for quite a while. So I think the most likely the reason of this discussion is really related to China initiatives on the DCEP, the digital currency electronic payment. So we see a screenshot somehow in our ABC Bank. It's look like it's a certain to DCEP is going to be introduced. So I think the very first question that I would like to ask Cho is, what do you think about this, right? Because China is actually known to be a relatively very famous in terms of actually we're cashless societies already. So do you think DCEP will eventually become a really real competition between Alipay and WeChat Pay, which is really widely accepted and adopted in Chinese community? And what do you think about the value of proposition and use case between DCEP and WeChat Pay or Alipay?
Yeah, good question. And let's go deeper into the difference between the DCEP or so-called CBDC of China and Alipay and WeChat Pay. First of all, from the legal power, you can see that the effectiveness and the security of DCEP is the best compared with the Alipay. And also the banknotes you are using in China are issued by the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, and the DCEP as well. So, but the Alipay and WeChat Pay is actually the electronic payment form. So they do not issue their so-called Ali Yuan or WeChat Yuan. You use Alipay's e-wallet and WeChat's e-wallet. They are not settled by the currency of the People's Bank of China, but instead those payments are settled by those commercial banks' deposit currencies. And in other words, the WeChat Alipay did not reach the same level as banknotes in terms of the legal status and legitimacy and security. And in theory, just in theory, if commercial banks in China they go bankrupt, so the deposits within the Alipay wallet and WeChat Pay wallet will go nothing. And but if bank somehow like if you use DCEP, you will never experience some kind of a similar bankruptcy. If the People's Bank of China go bankruptcy, I think this is the doomsday of the whole China. So And the second difference is that the DCEP use somehow so-called dual offline payments. It means that you do not necessarily require a network signal, a communication network, to process the payment. For example, if I go to somehow like underground, a deep underground supermarket to buy something, there's no cell phone signals. You cannot use WeChat, Alipay. In these scenarios, you can still use the digital currency, the DCEP of the People's Bank of China. And but people may ask that the different, also called the competition between the DCEP and the Alipay and WeChat. My answer is actually there's no competition between those two somehow forms. Firstly, DCEP is the legal currency, is the fiat currency, and they do not from the perspective of now up to now, they do not provide the so-called somehow like a very convenient wallet to replace the Alipay or WeChat Pay. But on the other hand, WeChat Pay and Alipay, they are working very closely with the People's Bank of China. So this somehow is like a value chain. The DCEP is the upstream. They provide the currency, and Alipay and WeChat, they provide the payment channel. This is a very good combination for each other. Yeah. But from the perspective of demand, I mean, our customers, customers like us for payment, the issuance of DCEP is not for the convenience for us. After all, you can see that the cashless society in China has already very convenient, very advanced. Even beggars in the street, they can use Alipay and WeChat Pay for begging. Yeah. Actually, this is very common. And the purpose of this DCEP and also for other CBDC is to better policy administration. There are two main points. First of all, is to significantly strengthen the implementation effect and efficiency of the central bank's monetary policy, and to form a full coverage of monetary policy without dead ends, and provide conditions for the implementation of unconventional monetary policy, such as the negative interest rates.
Nice.
Yeah, and secondly is the requirement for AML and KYC, and also this, the DCEP can strengthen the supervision and the statistics of the flow and the funds from the perspective of the supervision departments like the People's Bank of China or other financial supervision departments in China. And when necessary, maybe the government will use CBDC as a legal sanction tool against those individuals or organizations like that. Just like the United States, they are using the SWIFT as a sanction somehow tool against the Iranian and the North Korean governments like that. So you see, this is somehow the difference between the CBDC and the WeChat Pay. And also, I don't think that there is somehow very fierce, there will be a very fierce competition between the CBDC and the WeChat Pay in the future. No competition. Actually, they are combined together.
That's actually really interesting point of view, because maybe from the Western point of view, with other outside point of view, is that DCEP is actually built for convenience, but actually China is very convenient already. So DCEP is actually have a much bigger picture in terms of monetary policy and even cross-border strategic geographical initiatives, or somehow some sort of alternative to SWIFT protocol in USD. I think that's a very interesting insight. Thank you, Cho. So I would like to have questions on Kelvin related to Libra. Actually, like competitions with DCEP right now. So the recent amendment for the Libra framework mentioned that there's a change in the framework. So instead of packing a basket of national currency, they would like to kind of like packing one. So what do you think about these changes? Is this kind of like because the change is basically because due to regulations, or do you think such change will kind of like endorse the U.S. regulators to be approved the Libra, or do you think that eventually Libra will live up their dream or the vision that's building global currency for the growth for everyone?
That's a really good question. I think starting perhaps with the regulatory piece and then moving on to the global currencies. If you look at the CARE Act that was recently passed here in the US in response to a lot of the kind of COVID epidemics and things like that that are happening here, the initial drafts of the CARE Act included the concept of a digital dollar in a lot of what they contemplated. So the regulators here in the US are definitely aware of stable coins and of kind of digital tokens that are pegged to the US dollar. And they have the very difficult job of trying to think through kind of all the possible scenarios, all the possible angles, you know, and making sure that what different initiatives are doing, including Libra, are not attempting to defraud anybody and are following, you know, really what's the best intent for the people. And that's a very, very tough job. You know, this space is something that didn't exist a few years ago. That wasn't even on the radar of the regulators as something that was emerging because the blockchain world moves so quickly. So, you know, in my opinion, for them to already be kind of looking at it and be contemplating it is a tremendous credit to the regulatory bodies. I feel that, you know, they're doing a very good job of being aware of what's happening, of looking in the right places, and of trying to, you know, ensure that what does end up coming out and what's used is really for the benefit of everybody. On, you know, really the basket itself, what I was personally excited about with Libra was the fact that it was pegged to a basket of currencies. You know, US dollars is without a doubt a global currency right now, an anchor for global trade and things of that nature. But the world is changing quickly. There's a lot of economies that are growing extremely quickly. There's a lot of players that are becoming really, really important forces in global trade, especially when you're talking about cross-border payments and things like that. And I don't necessarily think that USD is destined to forever be the global currency. I was really excited about building a token off of a basket that would be more representative of kind of the global trading world that we live in, the cross-border settlement world that we live in. And I think if they're only really pegging off of USD, they're going to have a difficult time differentiating themselves from the other tokens that are already out there that are pegged to USD and that are, you know, backed one for one. You know, like OKEx own USDK, for example, and TrueUSD and USDC and kind of all of these other tokens. Obviously, Libra has a network, but I'm not convinced that their network of partners is enough. I think what they're going to end up building is a product that's already been built 5 or 6 times, and they're going to have a lot of problems getting traction. I would love to see them move back to the basket model. I think that's a much more interesting project.
Nice. X actually is very excellent. I think I agree with your premise that they change by packing only one new organism because of the kind of like the regulatory pressure. But it's got to be much more interesting if your vision is going to be building global, or your currency going to be representing a global unified purchasing power. You have to pack your value with a basket of national currency. But think about that. Maybe there's more questions to Cho. So because of the Libra's competitions or the other stablecoin project competition from the US side, so what do you think that, or maybe DCEP is part of the global strategies for Chinese government to promote offshore Chinese yuan, which is very actively doing right now? Actually, a very similar approach or initiative with the One Belt One Road initiatives or the high-speed railway developments globally. So do you think these CPs actually can be killing factors or really key factors for promoting digital Chinese yuan across the globe? and even eventually to become a settlement currency for global trade? If so, what do you think the challenge ahead?
Yeah, yes, a very good question. Thank you. Actually, the answer from my side is we still need to see. But if if the CBDC is a success, this will place a multiple negative effects for the U.S., especially for the dollar. So if foreign business, especially within the Eastern Asia regions, they can bypass America's so-called those gatekeeping agencies or banks like SWIFT or those infrastructures, Washington will lose lots of those unique power to impose sanctions on those, countries, those enemy countries like Iran or Venezuela or other countries. And also if they, no longer face, those countries, they no longer face the exchange rate risks. So foreign central banks, they have no need to backstop their currencies with dollar reserves, and they have no need to purchase the U.S. government bonds. And the result is that if the demand for USD and also the demand for government bond of United States drop, and they will result in a higher interest rate for United States governments. And they will create a very huge burden for the financial status of the federal government. So, and also for the business loans and the mortgages, credit cards, and very other form of US borrowings. So, namely that if CBDC, if DCEP of China, when in the future, the United States government maybe will go bankruptcy, maybe, yeah. And also China is try, the best to lobby those so-called trade partners, especially within the ASEAN countries like Philippines or Indonesia, to accept RMB as a vehicle for payment. And also China, actually back to the 1997, China has somehow created a protocol called the Chiang Mai Initiative. It means just like a small regional version of the SDR, of the IMF SDR. So you see, China already has some kind of substitute to replace the IMF, to replace the SWIFT, also financial global so-called institutional vehicles or tools to impose the American dollar power. So CBDC or DCEP is just another new step forward to replace dollar for China's strategy. But we should also go back to the somehow like the current situation. More than 50% of all international trade is still conducted in the US dollar. So it will be very hard for China to persuade those partners, trading partners, to use RMB instead of US dollar. And also, very interestingly, that a lot of those countries within the Eastern Asian regions, like Vietnam, also like Hong Kong, peg your currency against the dollar. So it means that if the dollar dominance was somehow destroyed, the currency stability of Hong Kong dollar, of Vietnam dollar, Vietnam dong, they will also resultantly destroyed as well. So you see, there are a lot of those challenges ahead of China, even within the Asian region, with the Eastern Asian region, to persuade the partners to replace US dollar with RMB or with DCEP. So it's a long way to go. And also, I believe in that DCEP is just somehow like the first step for China to use the so-called digital infrastructures for implementing the country's will to replace dollar. We will see more of those kind of tools. Yeah, maybe decentralized SWIFT and also maybe a decentralized IMF. Who knows?
Yeah. I think I think replacing or destroying the dominance of USD won't benefit China as well, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of trading partners in China is actually pegged their national currency with USD. So the world actually needs a relatively stable US dollar. And at the same time, I agree with the premise that maybe the world also needs more choice in terms of settlement currency instead of only one. So if there's more choice on the currency of that currency in really one basket, actually more precisely reflect the global purchasing power across the globe. So of course, I agree that CNY or DCEP is a very first step. It's actually a pretty good step that for the Chinese government to promote the cashless success to the other countries. But China is very great. It's big too, because it's like a CNY is yet to be free convertible, and it's also the trade settlement currency is only account around less than 1%, yes, global trade. So still, to Kelvin, right, the USD obviously is still undoubtedly the global currency right now. We got without doubt. So global trade settlements or every pricing vehicles actually USD based it. So even the similar package right now due to COVID-19, I think it's going to be distributed very soon. I think it should be a very good opportunity for the US government to actually think that, hey, why not to distribute in the digital dollar format? So it's looked like to me, to the world, that the US government isn't really aware of the upcoming competitions from Chinese side about the DCEP. Or maybe they have a huge obstacle challenge in the regulator and the Senate's perspective. What do you think that would the introduction of DCEP will actually change their perspective, and they will somehow speed things up to endorse project like stablecoin or project like Libra to be moving even faster to get a real official status in US community?
I think, historically and really to this day, unlike China, which, as you mentioned earlier, is basically a cashless society, the US is still extremely cash heavy. And a lot of the kind of payments infrastructure and the payment rails haven't necessarily made large improvements in a very long time. The position of the US has seemed to be that this is a problem that will be more solved via private industry than by government action. So we've seen the rise of a tremendous amount of different payment apps, for example, while not blockchain based, still to move digital currency between one person or another. We've seen the rise of kind of Square's platform. We've seen Venmo, PayPal, all these other private companies that are tackling this problem. And I think, a lot of that is due to the regulatory landscape being very complex, but also the US government's general approach of being a little bit more hands-off and kind of letting the innovation economy see if it can tackle the problems. USD is, at least today, still kind of the anchor, right? With various, other fiat currencies all pegged to USD, not to mention kind of digital stable coins. They're basically all pegged to USD, right? Even Tether is pegged to USD. So I don't think that the government has a lot of pressure necessarily today to respond to DCEP because USD is so entrenched in the way that the world works as a settlement currency. My guess is that there'll be a few cracks at it from the private sector first, with Libra, being a good example, where it's being spearheaded by kind of private or public companies here in the US versus being spearheaded by the government. But I don't think the regulators are asleep, so to speak. I think the regulators are very aware of it. The government is very aware of it. Like I mentioned, the CARE Act initially kind of called for a digital currency. So it's definitely something that's on the radar of the government. And the regulators are moving very quickly to understand what's going on. And we as Prime Trust and everybody else that's kind of in the space here in the US are always happy to to get to work with the regulators and kind of help form these opinions of how they view the world, because they're, they're very smart at what they do. They end up usually doing a pretty good job. So I don't think there's a ton of pressure today, but eventually there definitely will be some pressure, and how we respond will be interesting to watch, and I think will come mostly from the private sector.
Agree. Right. So look like the U.S. governments are actually pretty comfortable by actually putting this job to the private sector, which is right, because the innovation and the dynamic in private sector is actually much more interesting if that's actually driven by the U.S. government as alone. But as I mentioned, actually we can see that DCEP in China or the other or some stablecoin projects in European governments, I think that's almost certain that there will be maybe one of the very first state-backed currency within the year, and going to be allowed. So I think that's bring the world a lot of, I would say, the crypto users, because everyone need to install some kind of digital wallets that can store a blockchain-based currency. So what do you think the implication of our world, the implication of the development of the stablecoin projects and the DeFi projects, or even to the exchange side? Do they need to, are we stepping into a new era of the next phase of the industry, from a really geeky environment to something really adopted to bring us to really real adoption to crypto? Maybe I can ask, this is a question about, maybe I can ask Mr. Cho to answer first.
Yeah, I think DCEP also state-backed currency like Libra maybe actually is a good opportunity for cryptocurrency, especially for exchanges like OKEx, and also for those decentralized form of financial services based on blockchains, like so-called DeFi. Since nowadays we are seeing that DCEP and also other CBDCs, the major purposes for those infrastructures actually is for policy administration, implementation, like AML, KYC, and also in a world nowadays, you can see a lot of those trends in the future for deglobalization, or so-called anti-globalization. So blockchain services, especially on the open blockchain layers, can provide a free trading infrastructure, open trading, and also I think cryptocurrencies can provide a safe haven for capitals on the rules, monetary policies in some countries, and also can help citizens or businessmen to avoid some financial or fiscal failure in certain countries like Argentina or Venezuela. And also from the point of the application, DeFi, I think, is not contradictory to CBDC, and even can be very compatible with CBDC, since I do not see any reason for somehow DeFi service provider with very good KYC, ML infrastructure, or somehow prerequisite, and cannot obtain the financial licenses. And so you can see that nowadays there are already a lot of those companies. They have already acquired some kind of those like MSB licenses or other licenses or payment licenses in some country, and they provide those stablecoin, blockchain stablecoin, on-ramp and off-ramp services for citizens. And you see this will be a very good gateway for those citizens. They can transit their USD dollar or other digital currency, the CBDC to those like the stable coins, like USDC, the on-chain stable coins, and they can deposit these on-chain stable coins within those DeFi protocols to earn a positive interest other than a negative interest inside those banks. So you see that I think the CBDC actually can fundamentally solve the biggest challenge ahead of our cryptocurrency world, ahead of the DeFi asset industry. We are nowadays, I mean, the DeFi industries are nowadays facing a huge challenges is the lack of native digital assets. So the CBDC can be the fundamental layer for a huge amount of native digital assets in the future. So this is my point.
How about Kevin? What do you think about that?
For me, you know, I like to take a step back, and I like to think about kind of the first time that I was exposed to Bitcoin and blockchain in general. The first, you know, pass that I ever took through Satoshi's white paper. And granted, you know, it wasn't a year ago, but it also wasn't that long ago, right? That it was kind of this concept of this crazy decentralized technology system, and I don't think you'd call it really a currency yet at the time. And that now today we're talking about state-backed currencies issued on kind of a blockchain technology, to me is massive validation that this is the direction that the world is heading. And I think the world moves so quickly in the blockchain space that it's sometimes frustrating that, you know, the governments don't move faster. But if you really step back and you think about how short of a period of time we've had these things, it's amazing that we're already talking about state-backed currencies. And we have a saying that we like to employ at Prime and other places. It's a rising tide raises all boats. And with kind of state-backed currencies almost certainly being a thing that get created this year, I view it less as competitive with other stablecoin and DeFi projects. And I see it more as this massive influx of usage, capital, whatever else you may have, that will certainly overwhelmingly benefit the state-backed currencies, but will also benefit many, many other stablecoin and DeFi projects. So I think the implication on the development of these other projects is that, you know, these other services are going to become more and more necessary. And I think people always want the source, some sense of choice, right? There's more than one bank. There's more than one almost anything. And there's a lot of opportunity in this market for a lot of different projects. But if there's no capital, if there's no users, if this doesn't become mainstream, then no one wins. So the state-backed currencies, I think, will bring a lot of this technology and a lot of these uses to the mainstream kind of audiences. And that's going to help the industry and all the projects in general.
Yeah, I agree. I think the key word, the buzzword right now is the validation, the concept validation. I love it because we have been talking since the beginning of Bitcoin white paper, but actually the industry start really become really robust around 2017, right? So it's actually a relatively short industry if you compare with the internet. But right now we're talking about national-wide, global-wide initiatives that the government really impose something on blockchain and trying to reshaping their financial or their monetary system onto the blockchain. So I think the validation part, the buzzword is absolutely correct. And I also agree that that will bring a massive influx of the mass audience to this world, to these communities, and that create a lot of innovations on stablecoin, on DeFi project potentially, even a regulatory perspective. So yeah, I think it's very exciting to the industry participants. But if we have to answer one really kind of like the risk area related to the stablecoin or the DCEP is what we call, I think maybe some of the skeptic, I would say, what we call the cannibalization between the saving deposits, which currently sit in the bank, because right now everyone is talking about zero or even negative interest rate environment, and we think that's kind of a zero rate, kind of negative rate environment is going to be last for quite a while. So people might be right now is actually more willing to keep their saving or keep their earning in the form of digital cash because of even more convenience than even more faster in terms of remittance and payment instead of put in the bank. So we can already see a third of USD stable coin just because of Fed cut the rate to zero. So what do you think that stable coin or even DCEP will actually threaten the role of the bank, which historically become the middleman of saving and lender? Do you think that will become a real threat, that eventually we don't need a bank anymore for these kind of basic service? Maybe let's start from Kelvin.
Sure. You know, banks serve a really wide range of purposes in the U.S. That are a lot deeper and a lot more fundamental than just holding cash. And I think there's kind of two important things to note about the flood of capital into digital cash. And the first of which is that I think people are less excited about the fact that it's digital cash because of ease of use or anything like that. I actually kind of think it's the opposite. I think people are flooding to it because of yield, right? If you're cutting interest rates and banks aren't paying interest rates on savings anymore, then there's no point in having the capital there. So I don't think that people are really flooding to the stable coins because they're stable coins. People are flooding to the stable coins because they can then go and deposit them in some DeFi project or something else where they earn a yield on their deposits. For the same reasons, we're seeing a large flood of cash into peer-to-peer loans and other things where people can earn some sort of a return on their capital. I think one of the things that's going to be really important for stablecoins and really the industry as a whole is to continue to push on usability. I think people as a whole have proven many times over, and I'm sure some people in the industry are going to be angry at me for saying this, but that people are willing to give up control in exchange for convenience. So there's definitely a group of people, especially in this industry, that are very particular about owning their private keys, controlling their keys, things of that nature. And as one of those people, I totally understand where they're coming from. But in order for this to kind of go past the early adopters and really become mass market, I think the focus has to be on convenience. People don't like banks because banks are somehow, much better products. People like banks because they're extremely convenient. They have mobile apps, they have websites. I can drive down the streets, and every 3-4 streets, there's a different bank. I can go talk to someone in person. They'll explain to me how things work. It's all very, very easy. And if something happens, there's a recourse, right? If I lose my private key, I'm stuck. If I can't remember the password to my bank, I can just call the bank. So there's kind of that safety net that people expect. And I think a lot of that is solved hand in hand. So we're always happy to work with a lot of our definitely exchange partners and stablecoin partners and other folks in trying to push the industry forward and trying to find a middle ground where we can really employ all this technology and we can still do it in a way that a mainstream audience who doesn't necessarily need to understand blockchain will get it. But if you take, at least in the US, and if you go to the average person here and you try to explain the blockchain to them, they don't really care. And why should they? When they put their money in a bank, they don't understand the underlying settlement mechanisms. They just know and trust that the number they see is real. And I think that's where we have to go with the stablecoin industry and things like that. And definitely the DeFi projects that focus on yield and focus on lending and some of these other things will give the banks a good run for their money, but only if we can make it convenient. That's going to be the key, I think.
Nice. So yield is part of the reason. I think one of the core reasons that the reason served the USD stablecoin. Yeah. So what do you think about Mr. Cho? So the DCEP, would there be a factor in the saving deposits, or in Chinese bank, which is very sensitive topic in the national bank right now?
Yeah, actually, I think that this may be a result of the CBDC, a result of the blockchain services in the future, since I think the negative interest policies will be very common among all those countries globally. And also some failure countries like Venezuela or maybe some other countries. So citizens, they will need a safe haven for their assets, and also for the deglobalization or anti-globalization trends, people will need infrastructure for open trading, for free trading. And also I think that those banks, especially those big banks like JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley's or Nomura, they are also evolving like an ecosystem, like a creature. So in the long term, I think there will be a trend for the combination of the blockchain service, and namely DeFi service, or has somehow like a hybridized services with the big banks or some kind of those internet finance service provider like Alipay or WeChat Finance. And also those financial infrastructure, those financial institutions, those banks, they will also need some CBDC infrastructures or those digital currency infrastructures for transaction, settlement, for wallet, for account services. I think DeFi protocols nowadays, like Uniswap or like 1inch, or even like MakerDAO, they can provide those banks with a universal and free to use infrastructures underneath their front desk or middle desk. So maybe Uniswap will be the so-called next decentralized Swift, who knows? Also maybe MakerDAO protocol, Maker protocol will become the next so-called decentralized SDR, who knows? And also I think that, and actually this is now has become something new, is companies like IBM, like Microsoft, like Consensus, they will develop so-called middleware between the centralized financial service like banks, security companies, and the decentralized protocol, decentralized financial protocols like Uniswap and MakerDAO, just like the Red Hat. IBM actually has already acquired Red Hat 10 years before. They provide the so-called customized services based on open source software. And actually Consensus is working in this area. They have provided some kind of those middleware to package those DeFi services into somehow like an API or SDK, and the big banks can just very easily dock those APIs into their infrastructures. And I think everything is going on, everything including those big banks, they are also involving now. And I see that JP Morgan is actually a very active player inside the Ethereum communities. In every DevCon, you can see JP Morgan guys, the Quorum guys. And also they are very friendly, they are very community oriented, wearing not suit, they are wearing t-shirt like us, like a coder, like developer. And so you see that in the future, banks will be, maybe they will be the biggest somehow like a user of those DeFi service, DeFi protocol, and we will see some new business models, so-called maybe like a DeFi as a service, DAFs, for those companies to use, and they will provide a very friendly, very good UI and UX for underneath DeFi protocols nowadays. And also those big banks, they can onboarding a lot of those existing user bases and also existing asset bases. And also they can have a very good relationship with the government, with other trading companies or industrial companies. And so you see, so they will create a very interesting infrastructures. The first layer, the front desk, is big banks or Alipay or some other industrial companies, and the middle desk may be a DeFi or maybe a CeFi. But in the transaction or settlement layer, there will be a lot of those decentralized, globalized, and also so-called free free software, those DeFi protocols. Maybe this is the future, just my own imagination.
But yeah, I think it makes sense. So with the introduction of state-backed currency, I think the next phase can be illegally reasonably expected might be there will be a decentralized protocol that with the benefits of KYC AML as well, but it's actually a global protocol for a globalized interest rate, globalized lending environment, globalized trading markets built on defined protocol. But as you say so, the bank, the Alipay, the payment gateways, or even the fund, the cash pickup point is basically the fund's office for the users, and everyone's just basically connected to defined protocol for the rates for the conversion. That every execution and transaction and settlement will be done on the blockchain layer. That is already a very good vision because we will substantially drive down our transactional costs in every aspect. So hopefully this vision will be kind of like happen in very soon, in a couple of few hours, so that everyone will be super excited that the real financial inclusion will be happening. So, but anyway, thank you for join this call. It's very interesting, insightful discussion for both sides. I think I'm really happy that we can put Schultz and Calvin for express his opinion. So maybe that's it for today, and I would really like to have another round discussion related to any other projects and other initiatives. But anyway, thank you for the guests. You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, man.